In your program, you'll see that the facilitator of this morning session is supposed to be Duma. There's been a swap, so Duma will work in my place. My name is Given. Good morning, you beat the traffic, well done. I did it too, well done to me. Welcome to essentially the 32nd annual Black Management Forum Conference. If anybody ever doubted the sustainability or at least ability of Dakis to organize sustainably, surely the BMF's got to be confirmation and affirmation that these guys can do it. So shall we hear it for ourselves? I'm not one for conspiracy theories, but I've been struggling to get a decent explanation as to why this year this conference will be held in these times. And hopefully when the president speaks, he will talk to us about tactical engineering of national and international events and literally placing yourself in the midst of it all so you can explain what is at play. And if you don't believe me, also look at the speakers on our programs. All the makers, troublemakers, good makers, makers are in some way involved in this program. So I think you guys are very privileged as members of the BMF that you'll get a first-hand experience as to what exactly is going on in South Africa. And Jimmy and the crew worked it out perfectly so that in the future when history books are written, the BMF will be right there in the center to be that organization and that conference that just explained it all once and for all. And trust me, by the time this conference will be done, there will be no question as to where South Africa is going, because it will have been explained in detail at this conference. And on that note, I'd like to welcome the Honorable President of the Black Management Forum, Mr. Nzimande.
Thank you, Program Director. It's always a pleasure to be with you. Good morning, everybody. You know, yesterday we had a contract with those that were here that we started at 10 to 8. I was here 10 to 8, and some of you were having tea. So, therefore, when the program runs slightly late, you must say, this BMF things, don't start on time. You were here, you were not here. Okay? So let's hope that somehow we'll make up the time as we move on. Indeed, 2008 marks the 32 years of the existence of the Black Management Forum, a non-racial thought leadership organization whose mission is to develop managerial leadership, primarily amongst Black people, and the creation of managerial structures and processes that reflect the values of the wider society. We are proud to say that during the time when the political leadership was exiled, the BMF somewhat fell into the void, albeit largely in the workplace, and particularly at management levels. Even today, the BMF continues to be the conscience of the nation in matters regarding workplace and socio-economic transformation, a role we don't take lightly. In the 80s, during the presidency of Ndlovu, the BMF met the exiled political leadership in London and in Sacp to brief them on the state of transformation in the country and to forge linkages to assist in bringing about the demise of the repressive regime in South Africa. The mission of the BMF, paraphrased, seeks to ensure socio-economic transformation and is very much aligned to the ideals of a developmental state. It was Professor Sacp who coined the term symbiotic relationship of the political and the economy of this country. In trying to understand that relationship, it should therefore come as no surprise that our theme talks to the impact of political leadership in the economic landscape. The BMF as an organization is not apolitical, yet politically non-partisan. I repeat, the BMF as an organization is not apolitical, yet politically non-partisan, and assuredly not be neutral on transformation issues, but objective, and seek to assist those who subscribe to democratic processes and inclusivity aimed at substantially and permanently liberating South Africa from the legacy of apartheid. This conference seeks to lay all bare, but also to provide a platform to constructively engage on a whole range of key topics as outlined in the programs. Just to highlight a few of these things. One of the structural economic matters the BMF wishes to continue, one of the structural economic matters the BMF continues to question is whether the rigidity of inflation targeting strategy is a correct strategy or not. I'm worried about this subject. Furthermore, we argue that hosting a budget surplus in an environment of abject poverty and joblessness is a worrying dichotomy for the BMF. Institutional racism, as evidenced by poor progress on employment equity, continues to worry the BMF. Whereas the BMF continues to support the independence of the judiciary, the independence of the legislation, and the independence of the executive, however, we need to remind you that all these three branches of government are run by human beings. Whereas the BMF is fully behind all the initiatives aimed at boosting the skills capacity of the country, however, following our observations, the BMF is concerned at the concerted effort by those who peddle their skills shortage rhetoric to psychologically prepare our people for a legitimized marginalization. This psychological preparation is comparable to what the late Christian in our 1932 conference in Cape Town referred to as a low-intensity warfare. It's a warfare that is aimed at bringing about self-doubt, a self-confessed unreadiness. It's a warfare that uses your gathered home to discredit you. It's a warfare that uses selective statistics to sanitize the onslaught. It's a warfare that rewards assimilation. It's a warfare that turns brother against brother. We're disturbed by these tactics in our public discourse. When you are qualified, your qualifications are inappropriate. When you have appropriate qualifications, you have no experience. When you have the experience, it is inappropriate and not relevant. When you have appropriate qualification, relevant experience, you are overqualified. Inadvertently, the BMF refuses to be alone in seeing through these smokes and mirrors. Why is it that South Africa lacks the confidence to profile herself as a developing economy with special needs and peculiarities such as broad-based PEE and employment equity and so on, rather than continuously pandering and playing second fiddle to the dictates of the first world economy? While the BMF is for non-racial, democratic, and just society, the BMF is concerned that the deliberate confusion of the rampant racism with race consciousness is aimed at silencing and demonizing those that dare point out that white people are still overwhelmingly overrepresented in the top structures of the economy. The BMF will continue to be vigilant on these matters. Delegates, these are some of the debates and ambiguities we aim to bring to the fore in the next 2 days. We are very fortunate to have a significant number of experts to help us deal with these matters, and your presence here today as active and participative delegates can only take this conference to the next level. I welcome you all and trust that we'll have successful deliberations. Thank you very much.
The President of the BMF, Mr. Nzimande. Once again, let's hear it for him. This whole story about Jimmy and the next government is unfounded. He told me, he will not be your next Minister of Labor. It's not informed. Okay. It's not informed. South Africans and rumors. In any case, it's too hard to tell at this stage, even if you were to accept that position, as to which party you'll be representing. So I understand why my brother wouldn't want to commit himself to anything at this stage. I would do the same. Just a few announcements. It is my fault that I did not ask you to switch your cell phones off. I apologize on your behalf. Secondly, if you're going to go out, please use any of these doors in the back, and not necessarily that one, whether it's for the next break or to the bathrooms or anything like that. Anybody ever ask themselves, why is it that where there's a Lord Ndlovu, there's got to be a Jimmy Manyi? I still don't have an answer. What I do know is that it is a mere fact of history that the position that Manyi occupies now, being the president, Mr. Ndlovu has been there in one or another. Similarly, that Jimmy at some stage worked for this man, and then he crossed the floor at some stage, Jimmy, to Barclays. And I thought, this is it, we're not gonna see these guys together. And I look at the program once again, they're sitting next to each other. So clearly a very tight relationship. Our next speaker is one of South Africa's top commentators, very bold man, particularly when it comes to issues of transformation and the role of black players or executives. He's done it over the years as the president of this whole organization. He continues to play that role of a challenger with solutions as the deputy president of Nedbank Group, amongst others. And under the broader topic of transformation imperatives, he will speak particularly to what role you, as black executives, are expected to play moving forward in implementing transformation, amongst other things. Within that whole topic, we'll also hear from Dr. Nzimande about his sense of alternative policies as it relates to economic change. We'll hear from Theo Botha on shareholder activism in advancing transformation. We'll also hear from Mr. Netshitenze a little later, talking about a 15-year review. But to break it all from the beginning, ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome Mr. Lord Ndlovu.
Thank you very much, given for a very brief introduction. Sometimes they get too elaborate and take away the time for the inputs and the presentations and the questions and answers. And at any rate, they tend to be inaccurate, these introductions. So I'm very delighted. None is bolder than Jimmy, and Jimmy works for no man. We knew Jimmy as a person who was prepared to ask for forgiveness than ask for permission. He just goes out and he does things. So he works for no man, whether it's Barclays or People's Bank or Tiger or whatever the case may be. He works for himself. None is bolder than him. That's what attracts some of us to him and consequently to the cause that he represents. A very good morning to all of you, friends and members of the Black Management Forum. It's my pleasure to be here. I must thank Jimmy and Nane and the total leadership of the BMF for extending this invitation to us. We do not take it for granted. We truly appreciate this opportunity. Although I must add that sometimes I doubt the value add that we bring in conferences of this nature, speaking personally. And also at any rate, with the passage of time, people who've been in organizations and structures for too long, not only do they tend sometimes to lose their focus and their sharpness, but they depart sometimes from key principles and positions of those organizations. So you must check me out. In other words, I leave that judgment in your hands. Do not assume that I'm anchored necessarily in where you are or ought to be. But I appreciate the opportunity. And I want to congratulate the BMF upfront under the leadership of Jimmy for having tackled the key issues of the day unambiguously, forthrightly, unapologetically, and with substance, even where it appeared as if there would be debates around the substance underpinning some of the arguments. They seek to find some science behind it. I see they went to the Human Sciences Research Council to get an argument supporting this urban legend story around skill shortages in the country. You know, the Human Sciences Research Council kind of supports Jimmy and the BMF on this position. We do. I do, by the way. There are many challenges that face this country, and BMF is at the forefront of these. We need leadership that is strong, sober, and more importantly, beyond reproach. BMF is a trusted contributor from a leadership point of view. We wish the BMF well, and we wish it stays the full course. You are the champions of transformation in this country, as reflected in employment equity and economic empowerment. Employment equity as incorporated in Black economic empowerment. My topic, as given as indicated, is to deal with what we would consider as our agenda as executives in the corporate environment within the context of transformation or transformation imperatives that is in fact a sub-theme that has been allocated here. I must say upfront that Black executives are the subject and the object of transformation, and consequently, they are beneficiaries of the process or processes, but at the same time, they are co-architects of the process and its outcomes. Therefore, they are not innocent or passive bystanders. They ought to be active. We ought to be active in the process, out of which we will benefit, but we formulate the processes that will deliver such benefit. Black executives have a special obligation and a duty to provide leadership around transformation. And this obligation or duty is justified on the grounds of their background, the grounds of our background where we're coming from, which requires us to read our society, particularly the economic structures of all forms of racism, and reform it so that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past. Because in doing so, as we challenge and reform, we create opportunities for ourselves. We have an obligation, therefore, to be champions of transformation. This is a matter of national interest. Transformation is a matter of national interest. We do so as Black executives, not because we lack merit, we do so precisely and because we have merit. We wish and aspire that that merit be fully utilized and unleashed. On this score of merit, your first line of defense as a Black executive and your last line of defense would be your performance and your values. Where there is a question mark on your performance, there will be a question mark on your credibility, therefore a question mark on your right to champion transformation in the first place. You will be seen as taking cover and hiding behind the issues of transformation. So it's a given, not even for discussion, that transformation must not be questioned. None should point a finger in your direction in terms of questionable performance. Yet we know that as you transform the organization you find yourself in or challenge it to be transformed, the area that they will focus on to undermine you and sap your energies would be in your area of performance. And if you look hard enough, it doesn't matter what it is, you will find some flaw in performance. So you have to be on guard all the time. Lack of performance is the basis for silencing the champions of transformation. So be on guard on your performance. But let's talk about the state of transformation, which informs the agenda of the Black executive in the first place. What is the state of transformation as we speak right now? There is no model company. There is no model CEO on transformation. In fact, I know some CEOs who want to do some transformation work after they have retired. They think it's social responsibility. Transformation is not sufficiently linked to governance, ethics, and sustainability. Governance must, of course, be inspired by social values and legitimacy. Social values and legitimacy are the very underpinnings of transformation if you analyze it. So there ought to be an active linkage between governance, ethics, and sustainability. White business must confess its racism and actively demonstrate that it's on a new path. It must renounce its racism and demonstrate in action that it's on a new course, on a higher plane. White business leadership must reconstitute at an individual level, at a personal level, their values in order to transform their companies. They remain in power as we speak. They have the obligation to reconfigure their values and align themselves more actively with the society in which we find ourselves. They must walk away from the belief that transformation can be achieved through self-regulation. They must fully embrace the fact that without consequence management, meaning a regime of sanctions and rewards, transformation cannot be effected. A serious regime of sanctions and rewards where management is penalized in the order of 30% and 40% of their compensation, lost to the fact that they have not transformed the organizations. Without consequence management, there cannot be effective transformation. It will not happen on its own. Transformation is a baby sitting in a bath of muddy water. In fact, contaminated water, I may add. The black executive, therefore, has the responsibility to rescue the baby, rescue himself, in other words, and rescue the society from this pollution of racism. She must rattle the cages. There is no other way. He must pierce the comfort zones. He is an integral part of creating a new South African business model, a model that is vibrant, responsive, and socially aligned. We need to create, and that's our responsibility as black executives, to lead the effort of the creation of a business model that will be proud of, that is vibrant, that is responsive, and that is socially aligned. The lack of transformation, of course, in business is directly connected to poor leadership in government on transformation. Some of these remarks that I'm making here, I have made before. My son reminds me of this, by the way. He says, I'm not saying anything new. So let me remind you, just in case you read these in the context of the current happenings and developments in the country. We've said these things before on more than one occasion. More recently, I said these things in April at the Financial Mail Conference, exactly what I'm going to be saying now, so I'm not saying anything new. Lack of decisive, clear, unambiguous, committed leadership from government on issues of transformation is a feeder into the lack of transformation in business, and therefore undermining the efforts of black executives to lead the charge effectively. Let me remind you, in the years roughly between 1989 and 1994, there existed a heightened sense of impending change to be driven by the new government. We were very active in the BMF during those times. We know this, that business was poised to adapt for what they saw as impending change in the sky. The peaceful introduction of change and democracy in 1994 created an atmosphere of gratitude and indebtedness to the new government, creating an opportunity, consequently, to extract meaningful transformation from them and a good transformation dividend, or at least an undertaking that was clear and unambiguous. That opportunity was missed again In 1998, 4 years later after our independence, we saw the first piece of transformation legislation in the Employment Equity Act. Of course, we're very active in this, as you all know, as BMF. Despite its strength, this piece of legislation, if you analyze it, you will discover that it is characterized by mixed arguments and mixed priorities. It seems to be shy and almost suffers from a sense of embarrassment to focus itself on black people and Africans in particular. It parallels, for instance, gender and race. And of course, it is pathetic and lethargic at implementation. We in recent times have to thank Jimmy as a new commission. This thing was dead at implementation because it was conceptually ill thought out in the first place. In the meantime, 8 years later, post-independence, we see the promulgation of the Black Economic Empowerment Act, which is a 10-page act. 10 pages on this substantive, bothersome, critical issue of change for the country. 8 years after our independence. And then, of course, we see the advent of charters with no clear ground rules as how these charters are to be formulated, these transformation charters, with no clarity on the definition, role definition of parties in negotiations, no balancing of power. We see in some sectors, ordinary employees, call them executives if you will, pitted against their own chief executive officers and chairmen of companies on whom they so entirely and absolutely depend for their career growth and promotion, and supposedly to negotiate with them. It's a sweet-out outcome. It's a gentleman's agreement. With no recourse from a power relation point of view, it can't be an outcome of negotiations. Therefore, some of these charters leave a lot to be desired simply because they are not founded on solid ground in the first place. Some of the sectors in the economy have been excluded from the charters. You don't understand why some have been excluded. The process overall was poorly and badly managed. Amongst other things, for instance, these charters equalize the important subject of ownership with other aspects of transformation, missing the preeminent status of transformation as a causal factor and a leverage on other areas of transformation, and equalizes it, and even introduces a silly concept of indirect ownership, which you don't know what it means. And black people bless it. As we speak now, these charters do battle with the code. I agree with Jimmy, scrap these charters. Mandela said, I think it was in 1998, that transformation is the core business of his government, but this government has not embraced transformation as its core business. We need to see some agency, some purposefulness, and a clear set of measures on the implementation of transformation, which can only be derived from a clear commitment from government. We must re-energize this process and reposition transformation. That is the challenge to black executives as we speak today, now, right now. Business is powerful. The pervasive power of business must come into the hands of black executives too. So I suggest that the black executives may not have that power yet. Business is a near overriding influence on society, on all organs of our society. They even supplant and uproot some very good upbringing that you might have had, coming from your family, or from your church, from your school, and from your society. Business is a powerful organ of society. Therefore, we need black executives to access that power, because it can be a powerful good or a powerful ill. Precisely for this reason, we must concern ourselves with the type and the quality of leadership that directs business and consequently that directs the economy. It's about the whole country. Black executives are therefore in a privileged and powerful position if they refocus themselves in respect of advancing transformation. They have the obligation. We have to have a common vision amongst black executives. We have to have a common point of departure. But very importantly, we need to get to a critical mass level in terms of requisite numbers in order to catapult and create a self-propelling process in advancing transformation. So the numbers which take you back to the profile of employment equity, which take you back to the measures, which take you back to consequence management, which take you back to the values of executive officers, who, by the way, generally speaking, have no personal track record as individuals of having advanced black people. They may advocate for the organization, but if you assess them as individuals, you would find almost the men lacking in the score. So it takes you back there. We have to create a critical mass so that this process can be moved forward. Black executives do not seem to grasp this challenge sufficiently. And as a result, we see some of them as part of the problem when we need to create a critical mass. It seems their personal career achievements prevent some of them from playing a representative role which is necessary to facilitate transformation. So we have an additional role, which is a representative role, in addition to our technical and functional expertise which we must bring to bear that performance. We have that role which we must play, which is representative in character. Let's grasp the challenge and the importance of that role as important as technical and functional challenge. For indeed, until the representative role is fully discharged, you will never be allowed to reach your full potential at the functional and technical level. Despite your training, you heard what Jimmy said. It boils back to the culture, to the environment, and to lack of transformation. We black people are our worst enemy, I said. We are our worst enemy. Black people switch quite quickly to material manifestations. Have you seen them compared to white people? How eager they are to show their chiffons, their little handkerchiefs here, their cufflinks on magazines. Have you seen how eager they are? How eager they are standing next to their cars and in their plush homes and their swimming pools? Have you seen how almost crass this thing is? How material this thing is? When there is something deeper, we are Western. There's a denial of a connection between the progress that we make and affirmative action and employment equity and the national project, this national interest of transformation. There are people who want to deny inaction by not saying certain things, by not acting in a particular way. They deny the connection between affirmative action, which is opened and acclimatized, prepared, tuned to the environment for their own progress. They don't want to see the connection, wanting to claim that they are where they are solely based on their own achievement and merit, which is absolutely not true. By the way, there is no such a person as the best person for the job. Now I'm entering the debate similar to Jimmy's on the urban legacy. There's no such a thing as the best person for the job. It doesn't exist. It exists in your imagination only. So if you line up 10 people who have similar experiences, similar qualifications and background, the one who will be chosen is not necessarily objectively and scientifically the best out of them, for you can't determine that. Okay? The one who will be chosen will have to prescribe, to conform and subscribe largely to the ideology of he who calls the shots. There is no CEO who holds his position outside the ideology of the principal shareholder. He's totally in line with it. That's why he is there. So, the sponsorship that comes with the selection process goes back to the values and what people think about you outside your technical abilities. become the first line of defense these days. When criticism is leveled against companies for lack of transformation, I've come across a number of these cases. Black people now, because they are empowerment partners, they have representatives in these companies, now they defend the company as to why it's not making the progress that it should be making. They are the articulate ones now who are redefining these concepts on transformation. So they will tell you that transformation is not just about black people, it's about transforming the structures of the company and these marketing approaches and so on. And bottom line, they evade the issue of the advancement of black people into key positions professionally and managerially. Black people do this. They do this. They defend and shield white executives and feel irritated when white executives are being criticized. And the only basis for this irritation is the sense of indebtedness to those who have appointed them. And translating such achievement at the personal level, albeit itself not where it ought to be and out of time anyway, by the time the appointment is made, late. This indebtedness is what causes this sudden need to defend and explain the company instead of challenge and lead the company. Black executives, black people are their worst enemy. We need a multi-pronged approach to recover. We need a recovery program. Too much time has been lost. Too much time has been lost. Transformation, and B in particular, has lost its appeal to ordinary black people. There has not been definitive leadership on transformation, both in the public and in the private sector. There are no clear champions. There's doubtful orientation and there's wavering commitment on this matter. There's an over-reliance on good faith and self-interest and self-regulation. I suggest the following 5 things that we need to engage in order to recover and make progress going forward. In order to re-energize the process, 1, we need to re-establish the Black Business Council. This was a formation initiated by the BMF itself, which is an umbrella body that brings all black business and professional organizations under one umbrella and provide clear guidance on policy issues and coordination. We've seen in recent times some of these black business professional organizations differing on what also appears to be petty things, and lack of experience on some of the individuals that handle some of these key issues. These show me his characters. So we need the Black Business Council to be reinstituted. And I can tell you now, it was done away with by black people. We need to appoint a transformation and BEE ombudsperson who will specifically deal with the issues of feasibility and fairness in BEE deals. There is unbelievable arbitrariness, unfairness in how deals are being struck as a result of the skewed power balance between the company and the BEE partners who are merely lined up, and this beauty parade takes place and they pick and choose and they do as they please. The end result of who the partner is not necessarily the best partner for the country for taking forward transformation. The processes are weak under which we operate on a matter of national interest. We need an ombudsperson who will vet and tick on key issues, qualifying these deals as having been fair and proper and having followed due processes. I speak as one who's been affected. I'm always tempted to name the companies that have been involved. But I don't have enough cash or money to protect myself, I guess. Thirdly, we need to set up a selection panel to recommend the appointment of key people. I'm talking about both public and private. The appointment of DGs, the appointment of CEOs in parastatals, government institutions, and the appointment of CEOs. We need a body in this country that will look at openings that are created at these key levels and make recommendations on a shortlisted basis. It goes without saying that some of the appointments that have been made leave a lot to be desired, both at the public and at the private sector. There are people who've been appointed as CEOs of companies that we have a big question mark on in the first place as to what qualifies this individual. And you'll quickly see the assimilation and the congruence of ideology and the lack of transformation in the track record of that individual, and the total silence on the matter, even when appointed. These appointments are too safe, and therefore, we are not going to be able to move boldly and get out of this process and deal with issues as ordinary societies ought to as much as is possible. So, this ought to be a managed process. Fourthly, we need to appoint a commission to formulate a strategy for effective BE participation in the banking sector, resulting in black people in a majority shareholding position in the banking sector. We need a commission to investigate as to why not and how it can be achieved, given the constraints and the challenges in that sector, given the centrality of the sector, as we all know now in the markets, given what's happening of that sector. And this may be with the participation in that shareholding by government, directly or indirectly, through parties such as the PIC or the ITC. As an example, black people have to be in significant or majority ownership in the banking sector. As we speak right now, we have come to accept that this is not where we ought to play, at least not at that level. I think it is a fundamental problem. Black business must collaborate. Fifthly, black business must collaborate with labor on transformation and on employment equity to ensure that the race issues enjoy priority over the class issues. The race issue must enjoy priority over the class issue. I was delighted the other day. I phoned the BMF. I phoned him. I was delighted when I heard on radio of this march and a petition being submitted at the Chamber of Mines by the National Union of Mine Workers. And this was about the advancement of black people into key positions, senior positions on the mines, which they say is not happening. I asked him, Nani, shouldn't the BMF go out there and march together with the National Union of Mine Workers? I asked him, Nani, go out there, carry the placards, and join the National Union of Mine Workers on this important task. The collaboration is lacking between black business and labor. Therefore, we cannot advance without that collaboration. I want to stress that some of these things may appear odd only in the sense of what we are accustomed to as influenced by external factors outside this country. I return to a point that Jimmy made almost in passing. We have to derive solutions that are indigenous, that are ours, that work for us, first and primarily, before they are aligned internationally and globally. He talked about pandering. There's a lot of pandering to the international community in this country by way of emphasis relative to the needs of our society across the spectrum of policy positions. We have to return to our country. Look, as we speak now, some banks are being nationalized. In the Western world, by doyers of capitalism, they're nationalizing banks. I'm not suggesting we should nationalize. I'm suggesting that we should apply our own minds to our own situation and come up with our own solutions, which may not necessarily sit comfortably short-term with the rest of the world. Where we do have to make compromises and sacrifice the advancement of our people, it must be because in the medium to long term, the benefits that will derive from there are greater than that local solution that will be produced. As I speak right now. As I speak right now, that mindset is not on board. There are people in this country who occupy key positions who seemed to think that their performance rating should come elsewhere, outside this country. We can't sit on surpluses and wait for a rainy day when it rains every day on our people. You understand? You can't sit on surpluses and wait for a rainy day when it rains every day on our people. Our people are poor, live in abject poverty, are sick. The health system is not working. The housing system is not working. I've just been involved in one case where a person couldn't get medication for high blood for a month in the township with 2 clinics for a month. What happens in the rural areas? Let's not sit on money because we believe there's going to be a rainy day. We are rained out as we speak. Black executive must show leadership, and African leadership, which is premised on courage and compassion. Black executives must be courageous and compassionate at the same time. The task of transforming business led by black executives is a daunting one. It cannot be discharged without courage. It cannot be discharged without sacrifice. You ask me? I can tell you. I can tell you the people who open doors for me. I can tell you a lot more people who close doors. But it's important to go to bed on a clear conscience and knowing you're making a contribution to your society. This task requires a high level of accommodation and sensitivity. This country is big. This country is big for all of us. This country is big for black. This country is big for whites. There's room for all of us. But there's a duty to discharge for this bigness and for this place that we serve to be sustainable. It requires true African leadership. This task requires true African leadership, which is an embrace of courage and compassion, where you are physical but emotional, where you are clinical but spiritual, where you are cold but caring at the same time, where you are operational but protecting and preserving, where you challenge but still embrace your brother who may not look like you. There are costs, of course, there are penalties, there's a price to pay to courage. Let's be aware of that up front. The denial of opportunities, the denial of rewards, the marginalization, the victimization, the undermining, the labeling. The labeling can be very effective, especially when it comes from the media. Tammy Mazwai once gave me a very good tip. He said, when a black person comes to me and says, "Hey, Muna, why people say you are an angry person?" You should turn around and say, "What do you say?" For in that conversation, you will discover that he agrees with them. He probably told them that he's angry. The penalties can be tangible and felt, can be painful. Let's recognize that. But we know people have paid even greater penalty for this space that we occupy right now. So courage and compassion are given. We ought to be strategic in our courage. We have to be considered in our strategy, in our courage. We have to choose the moment, time. We have to choose the battles. And we have to choose the most effective means of engagement for an effective outcome. You have to be so vigilant, so alert, know when to keep quiet, only to return, and know when to return, but never to walk away. You must know how to balance the power that you don't have against the power they have. Know how to keep your powder dry, so to speak. How to retain your utility. How not to burn yourself. How to stay in that one organization whilst you keep on challenging it and wrestling it to no end, continuously, and still stay. The means must justify the end. Our end is justifiable, is wholesome. Our end is credible. Our end is good. Our means must be as pure, as justifiable as the end. We must at the same time preserve the dignity of those that we differ with through the means that we utilize, but focus on the issues. It is an act of greater courage not to be vindictive in your victory. It is an act of greater courage not to be vindictive in your victory. I conclude. In other words, preserve, take prisoners, and make brothers out of prisoners. I conclude. The transformation process has wandered. The transformation process has floundered. Because the outcomes of transformation, namely a new society, are so revolutionary, it requires courage and compassion. With the passage of time, we will lose momentum. With the passage of time, we will suffer fatigue. But we should remain vigilant. We should not succumb to self-doubt or to lower our sight and settle for less. Black executives must stand up and be counted. I know if I can ask you literally now, who are those who are prepared to stand up, I will not be disappointed. The BMF must lead, but the BMF must protect the integrity of the process and the dignity of all involved in the process for the desired outcome to be shared as a national pride. Black business must regroup. The BMF must lead. Thank you.
Forever young and forever sharp. Some gents just refuse to age, and God knows is one of them. Thank you very much, brother. As he was talking, I checked and I realized I have no cufflinks and I feel better. Just not today. Very thought-provoking words, thoughts, some very bold ideas as well. And as I was going through the program, I realized that given the profile of most of our speakers, some of the ideas shared may find reception because, comrades like my next speaker has moved from being an observer and a commentator to an insider, which will be fascinating as I listen to him and as we all listen to him, because you might just get a sense of some insights, not only from a policy point of view, but from a detailed point of view. He, of course, like Jimmy Manyi, denying ideas about being the next Minister of Labour. My next speaker as well has whispered to me. My next speaker has whispered to me through SMS as he was walking up here that this whole rumor about him being the next Minister of Education is unfounded. guess that rumor is merely, it's not informed, but I guess by association he's very passionate about education. He's a doctor of philosophy and has been involved with education from a policy point of view, both within Parliament as well as with various educational institutions, particularly those of higher learning. Always fun to listen to, never a dull moment. There is a gentleman, please welcome the General Secretary of the SACP, Dr. Nzimande.
Given, because of your mischief and naughty comments, I've decided to change what I'm going to speak about and take out a speech that I'm carrying with me as to why the ANC dissidents are wrong to try and leave and challenge the African National Congress. Comrade President Jimmy Mani, thanksgiving for your introduction. Fellow panelists, Lord Ndlovu, the leadership of the BMF, and most importantly, to all the participants at this gathering, the BMF annual conference. I was reading the newspaper as I was coming to here and saw that Mercedes-Benz is sponsoring this conference. And indeed, when I came in here, I saw that. And I thought, Jimmy, with your permission, it would be a good idea if the BMF would like me to be part of its activities. For Mercedes-Benz, not only to donate to BMF, but also to donate a 15-seater to the SACP so that we can fetch members of the Central Committee from the airport. Thank you very much. It's always an honor to be part of this gathering. We really appreciate this opportunity as the SACP. My only worry is that I've been asked to talk about our alternative economic policy perspectives that are required to advance the South African economy. I was really reluctant to accept this invitation, Jim, because I'm not, as I have said, an economist, but I'm a communist. But the reason why I accepted, I thought, well, it's too dangerous in any case to leave our economy only in the hands of the economists. Coincidentally, this invitation comes one day before the start of the Alliance Economic Summit, which starts tomorrow. Today's discussions gives us in the SACP the opportunity to flag a number of issues that we intend raising in the course of the weekend summit. Even more importantly, it gives us the chance to state publicly, and even before the summit occurs, what our expectations from the summit are and what they are not, as one dimension to addressing the question you've given me. The point I've just made is very relevant because, especially after the ANC's 52nd National Conference in Bulugwane, the economic debate in much of the media has tended to be portrayed as if it were a clash between two polar opposites. On the one hand, we are told there are existing economic policies which have got all the fundamentals in place which have assured us of a supposedly unprecedented decade of sustained growth, and that are now helping us to survive a turbulent global situation better than many other economies. We are told that is the one pole. Incidentally, Lord, you are right. I notice now that we have the United Socialist States of America. As all the banks there are being nationalized. On the other hand, we are told there is some ill-defined alternative, which is macro-populist in character, which wants to abolish inflation targeting because it doesn't understand in that inflation hits the poor harder than anyone else, and that wants to carry out widespread redistribution without appreciating that you have to grow the cake if you want to increase the slices. With this mechanical, because it is a very mechanical polarization, the headlines then become, will economic policy change? Will the Minister of Finance blink? Will the emboldened post-Polokwane Alliance partners prevail? Posing the issue that way then leads to these kinds of headlines. In this scenario, COSATU and the SACP are pitted against the ANC. Dire threats of market reaction are rolled out. The current confluence of negative macroeconomic indicators emphasizes the agency of dealing with the constraints to higher rates of growth. It emphasizes the need to speed up restructuring of the economy. Short of this, the economy will run into balance of payment problems, infrastructure limitations, inflation, and steep household debt. Weaknesses in the agencies of economic policy noted in the previous 10-year review have by and large persisted. Unquote. But let me also quote another, something else from this. This is one way, by the way, of coping that I didn't have time to write my speech last night because I was in a meeting till very late. So you must have many quotations. I quote again from the 15th year. Broadly, the South African economy has retained most of the dependent colonial characteristics, with high levels of concentration of ownership and related barriers to entry. A number of the largest companies have shifted their headquarters or have been partly acquired by foreign companies, opening up possibilities for worsening the outflow of resources through transfer pricing or movement of dividends. Related to this is the underdevelopment of SMEs compared to other developing countries, unquote. By the way, we are sitting here observing a disaster and keeping quiet about it. Why do we sell telecom to Vodafone? Why? In other words, we are continuing these features that the 15-year review is talking about. Our only real major ICT bank is going to be controlled by the British. Yet we complain that when in phone Equatorial Guinea, which is where I was last weekend, the call has to go via Europe. From here, Europe, then to Equatorial Guinea. Yet this asset, telecom, we sell it to imperialists, frankly. And that is the continuation of colonialism by other means in the modern period. But what I can note from these quotations that I have referred to are a number of salient points. That we have to move with urgency to restructure the economy. The necessity of this urgent restructuring is related to the systemic or structural features of our economy. And that these structural features are essentially the same structural features that have prevailed prevailed for a century or more. They are the structural features of a colonial dependence growth path. Among the core features of this colonial growth path are high levels of concentration of ownership and the chronic underdevelopment of the small and medium enterprise sector. We complain about BE. The nature of BE today in South Africa is a reflection of the colonial character of our economy. It's not black economic empowerment, let's not cheat ourselves. It's just turning black people into the appendages of the same old white capitalist class. Let's be honest. I'm glad Lot was touching on the banks. Our friends. Interesting, this line of argument now articulated in the 15-year review has precisely been the line of argument developed by the SACP over the last 12 years. We welcome that government at least. Our government is moving closer to our own thinking about these matters. In welcoming these and many other insights that are in the 15-year review document, there is, however, one area of criticism that the SACP still insists upon. Understandably but unhelpfully, the President's document skirts over the shortcomings and illusions of earlier government economic policies. Unless we self-critically examine these, we may fail to adequately come to terms with the paradigm shift that is now urgently required from all of us. To be sure, the shortcomings and illusions of, for instance, the gear package of policies are often alluded to in the review document. In the SACP, as part of answering the question an alternative to what? First, we have characterized the strategic agenda that needs to be changed as what we've referred to as the 1996 class project. It is a strategic agenda that has been led by former President Comrade Mbeki. Central to this strategic agenda was the firm conviction that a new South Africa could only be built on the basis of a tacit pact between the new ruling elite and international and local monopoly capital. Programmatically, this pact involved the prioritization of returning the South African economy to growth and profitability and global expansion. The return to growth, it was believed, required shock therapy in the shape of a self-imposed structural adjustment program GEAR that focused on creating a macroeconomic environment that would, it was assumed, attract major flows of direct investment. Now, very quickly, President and delegates, this shock therapy required drastic measures. The marginalization of the RDP, the demobilization of the ANC, the marginalization of the allies of the ANC, the downsizing of the public sector in critical areas like education, healthcare, and crime fighting, the phasing out of exchange control, and an accelerated program of privatizing and corporatizing publicly owned entities. This shock therapy, therefore, required a sharp break with the long-standing political traditions of the ANC of popular involvement in policy formation. The GEAR program, as President Mandela was later to concede, was and had to be announced as a fait accompli, written in stone, non-negotiable. The decade of post-1996 shock therapy-induced growth resulted in 1 million formal sector jobs lost in the first 5 years. Hundreds of thousands of other workers were casualized. A further 1 million farm laborers and their families were forced off farms and into marginalized casual labor. As commercial farming was compelled by rapid liberalization measures to restructure and cut labor costs. Major South African corporates benefiting from liberalization measures delisted from the JSE or sought dual listings to increase their leverage over the new South African government. We now deal with many of our former corporates who amassed their profits under white minority rule as foreign investors now. In fact, if truth be told, they are no longer South African companies. Just like Telkom shall never be a South African company again for as long as it is in the hands of Vodafone. President, this is what we are seeking an alternative to. And we are saying as the SACP, any sustainable growth and development strategy must address the structural transformation of the way our economy grows. By the way, there is this myth which gets repeated all the time, that if we have higher levels of growth, we will be able to tackle poverty and unemployment in South Africa. It's not true. Growth on its own can be meaningless. And it's not true that this is the highest growth ever experienced by the South African economy. It's not true. Between 1963 and 1973, the apartheid regime had under the apartheid regime, our economy grew by between 6 to 8%. But the majority of our people never benefited from that. That is why, therefore, we are saying the fundamental problem we face, we have political freedom but without economic power. And the colonial character of the economy has not changed. Exporting of minerals unprocessed, high levels of monopolization in our economy, dearth of skills, especially amongst the black majority in this country, and firm control in a few hands, now joined by a small grouping of a black elite. By the way, we always have this thing with VAV, because I see VAV now and again. We sometimes wear these, what we call the B issues. And the B issues are very interesting because they are self-explanatory. It's not a criticism. I know there are lots of them. Because what they do, they get narrower and narrower as you go. And there's even the story that when you are wearing those shoes and you are knocking at the door, you have to face this way and then knock. Because otherwise, if you don't do that, the shoe will reach the door first before your hand. Now, what's our perspective then, President? We are saying we need to commit ourselves to a sustainable and inclusive growth path. And it must be anchored around a state-led industrial policy program that supports and is supported by the progressive realization of our key developmental priorities. The key developmental priorities are jobs and sustainable livelihoods, the transformation of the health and education sectors, the transformation of the criminal justice system so that all our people are able to live in safety and security, and rural development and agrarian reform to end the neglect of our rural areas and to prioritize food security. That's the essence of our view. Let me then try and spell out a little bit more, still trying to stick within my half an hour. that I was given. That lot, Comrade Jimmy, finished at 10 minutes beyond his time. It's none of my business. By the way, I would like to say to the leadership of the BMF, I think at some stage it would be good if we could have a bilateral discussion, so that we could thresh out some of this, because it's very difficult to concentrate these things within 30 minutes and share with you further some of these perspectives. I will just highlight a few things. Firstly, comrades, we think that we need to rethink the role of Treasury in government to begin with. We have a highly anomalous situation where in government you get departments queuing to the Treasury for money. The Treasury says, yes, you will get, no, you won't, you will get half. It's dishing out. And Treasury has become the key strategic department. We need to reverse that. Our developmental agenda should be the key from which then we say to Treasury, how then do we use our funds such that we are able to achieve that agenda? That is why, as the SACP, one of the things we are arguing for as part of necessary economic reforms is the development of central planning at government level within each sphere of government and across the three spheres of government. You find in one locality 3 projects, one by national government, one by the provincial government, one by the local government, operating in silos. They are not communicating with each other. Huge wastage of resources. That is why, as the SACP, amongst other things, we've been thinking that maybe we even need to rethink how cabinet is structured. Maybe you need 2 layers of cabinet. You need fewer super ministers who are going to coordinate cabinet ministers below them, clustered around our key priorities. Secondly, we honestly do need to review the mandate of the Reserve Bank. Now, let me preface this by saying, I know my friend Tito sees red when I ask this. He becomes redder than I am. You see, the essence of our argument is that what was wrong about GEAR were 2 things. Well, 3. The first one was that it was imposed, forgetting that your economic policies are as good as the buy-in from the population. Your economic policy may appear so coherent and rational on its own when you look at it, but unless you have the buy-in, you are not going to win. The second problem with GEAR was that we focused on macroeconomic policy without a clear microeconomic strategy. If we say you must have a budget deficit of not more than 3%, in order to do what? In order to do what? Because perhaps we could have said the requirements of the country were such that if we were to speed up land reform, you required a budget deficit of at least 6%. So you have macroeconomic policy that floats on its own. That is why we are saying, amongst other things, we need to review the mandate of the Reserve Bank. Why is it that the mandate of the Reserve Bank is only inflation targeting? We say we have a band of 3 to 6% of inflation. Why? What's magical about 3 to 6? What's magical? Is it not possible that we can say, in order to create jobs, maybe inflation, we can allow it to go to 9%? And inflation targeting is a blunt instrument in any case. Oil prices shoot up, you raise interest rates here, something that we have no control over. So if the oil price keeps on going up, you raise interest rates ad infinitum and you kill the prospects of creating jobs in our country. Why can't it be that the mandate of the Reserve Bank must also include job creation? That in manipulating your macroeconomic indicators, you must factor the priority of job creation. It's a problem. Even the inflation target itself needs to be reviewed and aligned to support our growth and development strategy. And such a growth and development strategy, we're very passionate about this as the SACP, must prioritize investment into the productive economy, including creating new industries, like in the energy sector. You know, it's scandalous for an economy like South Africa that even these light bulbs, we import them. When we had load shedding, you know I'm from Dambuza, in Pietermaritzburg. I didn't know that there's something called load shedding or whatever. Thina kwaDambuza besazi ukuthi ugesa ukho. There is no electricity. That is load shedding, this or that, but you learn out of problems. I was looking for a generator. There were no generators for a while in the country because we import them. We don't produce fridges and stoves in South Africa. We import those. Shouldn't we? What we are arguing is that we need consciously to say we must drive a program for local investment, especially for local production of things that are on demand from your ordinary workers and the poor. I know Jimmy Mani, maybe Lord don't like this, but I'm not here to please them. I'm here to address you. BEE itself must be subjected to this logic, just like the rest of the economy. For us as the SACP, there is one criteria to be patriotic, or be patriotic, be part of a patriotic bourgeoisie. We'll debate that day, one day, about this issue. Is that we need to grow the productive capacity of our economy and move away from what Fidel Castro calls this casino economy. As we are seeing now internationally what is happening with the financial sector, it's because capitalism is increasingly drifting towards financial speculation and not investment into the productive economy. That's why I'm a communist. That's the sickness of capitalism. I'm sorry to offend you, but you invited me, you have to put up with me. We are happy that we fought the struggle against the privatization of state-owned enterprises. We used to argue with some of our comrades in business to say, why are you pushing, some of you pushing for this? The South African economy is so huge. If you're a smart businessman or woman, you can get many opportunities. Leave Transnet alone. Leave Telkom alone. We failed with Telkom. But with the rest, at least we succeeded. And we also say we must create new state-owned enterprises where needed. That's why we support one of the Polokwane resolutions for the creation of a state-owned mining company. In Botswana, all diamond companies that invest there are 51% owned by the Botswana government. As a rule. Yeah, private sector 49, it's a lot. I don't mean lot. It's a lot. Lot. We have an issue with Sasol. I know there are some of you who work at Sasol. I don't mean you. Sasol was built by state money, taxpayers' money, sold for next to nothing on the eve of our transition to democracy in 1994 by de Klerk. Subsidized so that if the oil price was lower than the needs of Sasol, we subsidized it. That subsidy is still continuing today. Yet Sasol is charging us at international prices, yet Sasol produces 40% of our oil and fuel needs, by the way. But we buy it at international prices. It's making obscene profits. There's a strategic sector. Oil is something that is non-renewable source of energy. That's why we are saying, let's renationalize Sasol as a strategic industry. Maybe if you complain too much, we can say, well, we will in that nationalization give 20% to BEE, but it must be broad-based. But it must be owned by the state so that we are able to manage and control somehow our own energy resources. The other challenge, and I want to challenge you as BMF because, and criticize you, that our economic discussions on policy and plans are too excessively urban-oriented. I haven't quite had BMF in some detail talking about the issues of land and agrarian transformation and rural development. We get that wrong. Already we're in trouble now. I agree with you. We can't put money and say we are waiting for rainy days. Yes, it's raining right now. I agree with you. Heavily too, in terms of poverty that we face. We have neglected this area. And as the SACP, we are pushing for a land and agrarian reform strategy that is premised on food production and food security and food sovereignty. Some few years ago, South Africa was a net exporter of food. We are now the net importer of food. With rising food prices, we are as vulnerable as anything, as we can see now. I agree with the financial sector, by the way. We need diversification. I would approach it from that way. That is why we fought for cooperative banks to support SMEs and cooperatives. The next point in our own thinking, in terms of an alternative economic strategy, we do need to diversify trade relations towards new emerging economic power blocks, India, China, Brazil, and not just Europe and North America. This is a medium to long-term goal, but we need to begin to do something now. We are still a real colony of Europe and North America in economic terms. And by the way, your political independence and sovereignty is highly restricted. Send your right. Awumthumelelanga uLord leli phepha. Last two points. Not because of that paper, I was going to make it. We must broaden the discourse and participation in economic debate, as I have said. And I love the way, I like to put it this way. Let people participate, let's broaden participation. Let's move away from the golf course as the key arena for key economic decisions, please. To end, what is the role of the SACP? We will continue on our part to mobilize the working class in this country so that its weight and ideas are felt in how our economy and economic policies are shaped, including a combative engagement in ideological struggle, which amongst other things will say there is nothing called a free market. It's a myth. You know, competition leads to monopolies. There's no contradiction in what I'm saying. The more you compete, the stronger will eliminate the weaker ones. And you will have monopolies. So capitalism is inherently a monopolistic system. Unless you engage seriously with some of these measures we are talking about in order to demonopolize our economy so that more people can be able to participate in our economic development. And in ending giving, that is why it's wrong for Terra Lekota and Mpazima Shilowa to attempt to challenge the ANC and its allies. Bangaphambi kwesitimela esingafikeki. Thank you very much.
So we should see that they changed. They are putting Joel here.
Can you hear it again for Dr. Nzimande? I'm concerned that almost everything that we fought for have become public enemy number one. The cufflinks, the shoes, the golf course. You are attacking my lifestyles, man. On a serious note, I see that some people are packed at the back, so there are more seats in the front. Feel free to move forward and be comfortable. There's also a media room at the back behind the exhibition center, so with internet access. I would like to hear what Blade thinks about. Is it okay if I have internet access, mobile cards and stuff, moving forward? Most of the speeches will be available on bmfonline.co.za. So we look forward to some more detail in that respect. I suspect, though, that Dr. Nzimande's speech may have been slightly adjusted had he been aware that Joel had been in the room for quite a while. Just a suspicion. But then we live in a country of conspiracies, so I might just be one of those conspiracies. Oh. He says no, he's only a civil servant. Shall we move on? By the way, for those who arrived a little late, we are running a bit late because of you. So don't blame it on the program that, what did they call me today? On the facilitator. It's not me. It's you. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the most admired brains in this country by friends and enemies, head of policy coordination in the presidency. Please help me welcome Mr. Joel Netshitenze.
Thanks, Program Director. I was hoping that by the time I arrive, Blade would be concluding his speech, because I didn't want to get tempted to debate the issues that he was raising. As he was saying, I'm a mere civil servant. But beyond that, from tomorrow, there is an Alliance Economic Summit. And we don't need dress rehearsals for that. What I am going to present, though I will rush through the presentation given the problem of time, would be facts and figures on where South Africa is today, where it was 14 years ago, and what are the factors that influenced the trajectory that we followed as a nation. This is contained in a 15-year review, which is available on the government website. We had a bit of a debate with the leadership of BMF about what to present. I thought we could do a presentation on the scenarios, the future we chose, also available on the presidency website. And I would still advise that we'll need to get time to look at those issues. Why is it important to do a review of this kind? Amongst other reasons, because we believe that if there has to be debate about where the country should go, we need at least to achieve consensus on the facts and figures about where we were and where we are. Yes, our interpretation of those facts and figures will be influenced by our ideological orientation. But facts are facts and figures are figures. And my understanding is that even Blade proceeds from that premise. And talking about facts, you see, for instance, the issue that Blade was referring to in relation to Telkom. Indeed, it's a serious one. But what are the facts? Telkom is not being sold to Vodafone. In fact, Telkom is unbundling its shares in Vodacom because the 50-50 marriage between Telkom and Vodafone in Vodacom was unworkable. So they served their divorce papers sometime ago. The reason being that arrangement constrained Telkom from getting into cell phone, wireless, new generation technology. Whilst Vodafone and Vodacom are now going into landline, Telkom could not go into the other technologies. So that arrangement favored Vodafone and Vodacom. Secondly, the arrangement, that marriage in which they were, limited Telkom and Vodacom from expanding into the continent. And therefore, Telkom was going to decline as a company without that possibility of going into new generation technology and wireless technology. And I'm quite convinced that when all the facts from tomorrow onwards are presented to Blade, he will agree that this was a correct decision. So facts and figures are quite critical in doing analysis and therefore determining where we go to. We might disagree on the route that we need to take, but at least we should understand, have a common understanding of where we are. I think Blade would have said something about the 15-year review, and should I say surprise, surprise, I agree with most of the things that he has said about the 15-year review. We believe that it is important for us to look at the past 15 years, and for BMF in particular, pose the question, where do we want South Africa to be 15 years hence? Where is the intellectual capacity within our country to do that kind of long-term planning? Where is the discourse amongst black intellectuals about these kinds of issues? In order not to repeat myself, I checked the speech that I presented at last year's BMF conference. And indeed, we did raise this question. Government is conducting a 15-year review. We encourage black professionals to start doing the same about the evolution of society on the one hand, but secondly about the evolution of this stratum of black professionals. Have we made progress or haven't we? And it's very critical when we do reviews of this kind to make sure that we understand the foundation of the tasks that face government. We are informed first and foremost by the Constitution, by RDP objectives, as well as the popular mandate that the current government received in 2004. It's not a contradiction in terms for this government to talk about RDP objectives, because the RDP is still operational. Reconstruction and development. You might hear Blade saying that GEAR replaced the RDP, the so-called 1996 class project. But in reality, what the RDP advised from the very beginning was that you needed to have macroeconomic stability that will allow for the kind of microeconomic reforms and programs that Blade was referring to. And perhaps this is not just a theoretical discussion, one about preferences, and perhaps not even one seriously about ideology. It's an issue that arises in very real terms in the here and now, and next year when Blade becomes a minister. Because the question will arise from time to time when even the most progressive of governments are faced with a run on the currency, with plummeting investor confidence, with a ballooning government deficit that cannot be sustained. What are the measures that you put in place to stabilize the microeconomy so that you can have those macroeconomic, so that you can have those microeconomic programs that are very critical for growth and job creation? Perhaps a bit of a curse on Blade as he prepares to shift to Tshwane. That if the current turmoil in the global environment continues, that new government, when it comes in, will be faced precisely with these questions. And therefore, when we debate macroeconomic issues, yes, we can state general principles applicable under all conditions, but let us not promise things that we might not be able to do when faced with reality. When you conduct an assessment of the progress of any country, the temptation would be to look at whether Blade has now got a BE issue or not. or whether someone else now has a bigger house and a bigger car, or whether a particular department has done certain specific things. That is not helpful. Rather, the most critical issue that you need to look at when you assess the progress of any society is impact. How do we assess progress in the context of human development indicators? It does not matter how many clinics you have built. If maternal mortality, infant mortality, child mortality are worsening, it will be a nice statistics, but it will be meaningless. And therefore, impact is the most critical methodology in doing reviews of this kind. And as you can see on the screen on the right-hand side, there are those about 10 indicators used also internationally to assess the progress of society. I will speed through some of these issues. One of the categories that we have to look at is an issue pertaining to governance. Is democracy, or are democracy and governance improving? And I think we need to be proud as South Africans, because faced with the current realities of turbulence in the political sphere, we tend to get worried, to be depressed, unable to distinguish the wood from the trees. But we should be proud. We have got a well-functioning democracy. It's a legitimate system. Outcome of our elections is accepted by all the parties. We have sought to establish fora for public participation. There will be many witnesses. We have tried to introduce transparency, to launch a campaign against poverty and so on. But there are weaknesses also that we need to address in this regard. The fact of protests outside government institutions tells us that something is not working properly. And the Public Service Commission has also made the observation that many departments are ill-equipped to act on corruption, and they do not give sufficient feedback on the hotline referrals that come from the public. Government established new structures to ensure coordination and integration of its work, but there are many weaknesses that need to be addressed, some of which Blade referred to. We'll come back to some of the issues later. With regard to the public service, it has already surpassed the demographic targets that we had agreed on, except for disability. We believe for all the problems that Blade might have referred to with regard to National Treasury, but the Public Finance Management Act was very critical in improving financial management within government. There are problems, especially at local government level. Reforms there have helped, but service delivery at local government lags behind financial injection. In rural and small towns, staff vacancies affect the most critical areas, and perhaps this is a question that BMF cannot avoid. What is the contribution that we are making, not only to the programs of training of these professionals, engineers, town surveyors, and so on and so forth, town planners? Is BMF making any contribution in this regard? And if the answer is yes to some extent, to what extent are we ensuring that those so trained are also encouraged and incentivized to go work in these small and rural locations? Perhaps it's a challenge that BMF will need to look at going forward. Another problem at local government level would be compliance issues. Only 25% received unqualified audit opinions in 2006-2007. And another problem of structure has been raised about self-supervision. At local government level, if we were to use the nomenclature of national structures, a Minister of Safety and Security would also be the chairperson of the Parliamentary Committee on Safety and Security. It's a challenge of self-supervision. And in reforming the local government structures, we'll need to deal with those issues. With regard to the social area, here we need to make the point that when you look at poverty, you need to look at it from 3 dimensions. Income poverty, poverty to do with social services, access to social services, and asset poverty. And the question that then arises, without going into detail, is what progress have we made in addressing these issues? One, income poverty in South Africa has declined. You can use whatever level of a poverty data line, 322 per person would be one good example. In 1995, it's 53% of households which lived below that level. 2008 is 48%. Progress might not be fast enough, but income poverty has been reduced. And amongst the main drivers in this regard is social grants. 90% of the 2005 incomes of those in deciles 1 and 2, I hope we know what we're talking about, lowest ranks receive social grants. The problem, though, and we'll come back to this, is that inequality has grown. When we come to the issue of human capital or social services, again to do with the other dimension of poverty, the figures speak for themselves. Just to select a few, only 58% of households had access to electricity in 1996. Today, it's 80% of households. Water, 62%. Today, it's 88%. You can even talk about matters to do with HIV and AIDS. Yes, we might not have been fast enough in introducing some of these programs, but today South Africa has got the largest antiretroviral program in the world. Expanded now to about 400,000 people who have been enrolled. Second largest maybe might be Brazil, with about 200,000. When we look at asset poverty, have we been moving too fast? Okay, when we come to asset poverty, I will continue in the meantime. When we come to asset poverty, government built about 2.4 million subsidized houses since 1994. They've already been completed, benefiting 10 million citizens. Benefiting 10 million citizens. Combined with land, what government has done since 1994 is to transfer about 70 billion rand worth of assets to South Africans. 70 billion. There is a problem with regard to land reform. If we move at the current pace, we won't be able to reach the 30% target for 2015 that we have set ourselves, and also problems of weak post-settlement support. And perhaps the question also needs to be posed, Are black managers, black professionals only about urban areas and industry in the urban areas? Do you ever, as BMF, discuss issues to do with agriculture and agro-processing? What about the economy? Between 1995 and 2003, the economy grew at an average rate per annum of 3%. The population was growing at the rate of about 1.9%. What that told you was that South Africans were getting richer at the rate of about 1.1%. Since 2004, the economy has grown at the rate average per annum 5.1%. Population growing at the rate of about 1.1%. What does that tell you? South Africans have been growing richer at the rate of 4% per annum since 2004. We'll come back to the question. The challenge is, how is that wealth shared? There are many issues to do with macroeconomic issues that I won't go into. But in spite of the difficulties that we're facing in the current period, what we need to appreciate is that one of the major drivers to the higher trajectory of growth has been investment. When we prepared as GISA, investment was at about 16%. That is gross fixed capital formation, 16% of GDP. We said to ourselves, optimistically, we should be able to reach the levels at which the South Koreas and Australias are, which is about 25% of GDP by 2014. But lo and behold, such has been the rate of investment that by 2007, already gross fixed capital formation was 21% of GDP. So we should be able to meet that 25% target long before 2014. And I would agree with Blade in his emphasis that investment should mean more than anything else, productive investment that creates jobs. There are many challenges with regard to the economic structure that we need to address. We all know about the transport gridlocks. Though I would have wanted to arrive as Blade was finishing, the other problem was just the gridlock between, as you can imagine, for Four Ways and Sandton. So having a plan to deal with infrastructure is a critical area that we'll need to look at. Crime. What do the data tell us? Overall crime rate peaked in 2002 and started to decline after that. Less incidents in most categories, but the problem that we face, it's violent robbery. It has been on the increase, affecting households and businesses. And this is what creates a sense of being terrorized by society. This is what creates an impression that crime is out of control. Most incidents have declined, but the increase is in those areas, and therefore it's a challenge that we need to deal with. Special teams have also impacted on crime, but what we have noted is that criminals tend to shift their operations. So as you succeed in dealing with car hijacking in Sandton, they will shift to Pretoria. We have also succeeded in addressing security challenges. I will not go into that. Also transformed the cluster system, but there are many problems that need to be addressed. Just technical infrastructure and capacity and gender sensitivity in our judicial system are some of the issues that require attention. With regard to the international arena, we know Nepal has become the point of reference in the engagement amongst African countries and with the international community. But there are certain challenges that we need to address. Regional environment has not sufficiently improved, still problems in Burundi and Zimbabwe and so on. Secondly, we have noticed a tendency in recent years for some very prominent people in a few African countries who question South Africa's credentials as a champion of Africa's interests. We still have to study the impact of the recent violence against foreigners on South Africa's standing amongst African countries. This, we believe, will have a profound negative impact. Even at other levels that you might think are not important, in the immediate aftermath of some of those violent incidents, some of you might be aware, South African referees were nearly beaten up by Mozambican players. I think they were refereeing a match, was it Seychelles or Mauritius? And when they gave a foul to the other team, the Mozambican said, "We know it's because you hate us." Might be a joke, but in reality, that violence has impacted on the standing of South Africa in the eyes of Africans, the rest of our brothers and sisters on the continent. There's also the challenge of business conduct on the continent. Do we apply the same ethical standards when we are in Africa as we would apply when we are here in South Africa? With what consequences? Because failure to do so results in a situation in which we start being identified as behaving like the imperialists. There is the next issue about international relations. We won't go into detail in this regard. The impact that we have made with regard to countries of the South. Young children who, when they come back from school, do not do their homework but have to travel long distances to fetch food and water and so on, no longer have to do that. So the various social programs that have been introduced by government are making a major impact, even on these vulnerable groups. So would be the legislation and other measures that have been introduced, including gender empowerment at the level of management as well as the political levels in government. One issue that we need to emphasize about evolution of government policy would be, and Blake agrees with me in this regard, the discourse should not only be about the dynamic of continuity and change, and thus in what balance. It should also be about continuity of change. Because critical for any government that seeks to implement development programs would be whether, as the environment changes, as you gain more experience and new insights, you are able to adapt your policies and programs to those realities. And the things that have happened since 2004 tell us that that has been happening. As GISA and GIPSA, the development of a comprehensive anti-poverty strategy, finalization of the National Industrial Policy Framework, conceptualization of the developmental state and so on, both in government and from the point of view of the tripartite alliance. All those things tell you, even with an electoral mandate, as you are implementing that, with experience, with a changing environment, you adapt to that change. And therefore, the dynamic of governance should also be informed by what we call continuity of change. I will very quickly rush through some of the qualitative critiques that we have of the progress that has been made. Is the profile of the government's programs with regard to the fight against corruption high enough, sufficient? You see this in the disjuncture between reality in terms of statistics and public perceptions, including international perceptions. How do we deal with the challenge of the conduct of our local government leaders, which conduct in some instances encourages the kinds of protests that we have had? In the social arena, we have talked about progress in education, health, and so on. And by the way, another interesting fact about education is that we've already met the United Nations Millennium Goal in terms of enrollment, which at primary schools level is about 97%. And you have got more girl children than boys, which more or less reflects the demographics of those groups. And by the way, even, or rather in primary and even at secondary level, girl children perform better than boys. A weaker applause of part of the audience, perhaps with weaker heads. But what then are the problems? Education. We know, we have talked about this culture of teaching and learning. But in reality, this happens mostly in poor areas. Education is one instrument that can help you break the cycle of generational reproduction of poverty. And if you had to have the best schools in South Africa, they should be located in the poor areas. Because those children from Polar Park, for instance, who managed to pass their matric with good performance in science and maths, will not go back to the same standard of living as their parents. Other problem is management. Management of the schools, if we deal with health management of hospitals. If we deal with housing, the challenge, 2.3, 2.4 million years, but most of these houses are being built further and further away from areas of economic opportunity. Chinese workers, many instances, stay in compounds and walk to work. South African workers spend somewhere around 40% of their wages on transport. So when you talk about cost of labor, you have to take into account those realities of the apartheid settlement patterns that we had to deal with. I will not deal with a number of the issues. I've been warned, problem of time, but I think Blade and Lot are to blame for this. Except to talk about some of the observations that were made in 2004. Major dynamics that had an impact on society. And the question was whether those things were continuing. One of them would be migration. It's continuing, not at the same rate as before. If you look at Gauteng, for instance, about 30% of its population would be made up of migrants. But the new salient element that requires attention is cross-border migration. Other issue that we had noted in 2004 was the matter pertaining to household unbundling. Whilst you were seeking to provide services to households, electricity, water, and reduce the percentages, household numbers were growing at double the rate of the growth of the population, as there was that decoupling. It's continuing, but at a slower rate. Economically active population, it was growing then also at the rate double that of the population. This has changed somewhat, and as you know, we have managed to reduce the rate of unemployment from around 31% in 2001 to 23% now. But there are also new dynamics that need to be dealt with. And this would relate to such issues as inequality, the point that Blade was making. We have observed that the higher rate of growth that we are boasting about does not result in the reduction of inequality. It's very critical, especially for the BMF and the professionals in our country. When all of us are celebrating this high rate of growth, the reality is that those in the upper ranks, on the upper ranks of the socio-economic ladder, benefit more than those who are lower down. And also, interestingly, whilst those on the lowest ranks have experienced a rapid improvement in their incomes as a consequence mainly of social grants, the lower middle strata are the ones who have experienced least growth. There's been growth, but least growth in their conditions of life. Who are those? They are your teachers, your police, SAPS members. And so when you have intensity of feeling in the public sector strike that we had last year, this might be one of the causes. Not so much poverty, but relative poverty. Many of the teachers would have the same qualifications as people who are assembled here, but compare their salaries to what you get. And that creates a sense of frustration amongst the lower middle strata. The issue is, what do we do about that challenge? The other matter that needs to be looked at would have to do with governance. And here to make the point that legitimacy of government is critical to the survival of any polity. What would that legitimacy derive from? It should be a government that is able to meet its obligations to society, including dealing with challenges of crime. It should be a government that is found in all the locations where our communities are, ensuring that the authority of the state is being asserted. Some of the dynamics that can be noted with migration and informal settlements, for instance, is that people migrate. They will migrate with perhaps a senior elder or whatever from the rural areas, go into an informal settlement. The authority in that informal settlement would be the same Induna authority transported from the rural areas. When people engage in democratic processes, say within the ANC, is the Induna who instructs them to vote for him, becomes a chairperson of an ANC branch, and later a councillor. It will appear on the surface very democratic, but in reality, weak presence of the state in some of these areas opens the way for these undemocratic networks and tendencies. Party political dynamics that we are currently experiencing also have an impact on the legitimacy and the strength of the state. In what way? When public servants decide not only to identify which would be their right with particular parties and even factions within parties, but if they further decide to conduct their work on the basis of those allegiances, that undermines the state. Public discourse also has an impact on this. And as South Africans who are given to hyperbole, some of the things that we say perhaps result in a higher profile, but the consequence is that some of them can have terrible consequences on the legitimacy and strength of the state. And we have to accept that ours is a nascent one which is quite brittle. And some of the states on the continent collapsed as a consequence of the kinds of discourse that people have and the conduct of people in state institutions. So an investigation is being conducted around what might have been malfeasance with regard to a particular metro council. And the mayor and the leader of a party says the judge who's doing that, Erasmus, is a useful tool of a political hit squad. I know you're expecting me to give other examples. I won't do that. You know what I'm talking about. Other related question would have to do with some of the issues that Blade referred to. Voluntary coordination. When we studied the government machinery, we have clusters, yes. But the ministerial co-chairs of clusters have responsibility with no authority and are unable, therefore, effectively to coordinate those clusters. And amongst the issues that will need to be worked on going forward will be how do you change the government system to improve that. In terms of the main conclusion, what do we say? It is that midway in the second decade of freedom, the foundation of the first decade and new initiatives have enabled South Africa to notch up to a faster trajectory of growth and development. But this is not yet enough. Challenges proved more deep-seated than recognized, like structural unemployment. Success itself brought new challenges, succeed with higher rates of growth, it impacts on infrastructure, electricity, roads, and so on. And the state had to learn new ways of doing things as it implemented. And in the midst of this, as you know, the global environment is not very positive. We believe that we can continue along this path that has got high rates of violent crime, structural unemployment, infrastructure gridlocks, with some high rate of growth, with some labor absorption, barely denting the ills such as economic structure and so on. With this, society will plod on with occasional social instability. So the question that all of us have to address going forward is there a possibility for a big push based on broad national consensus, propelling the totality of national endeavors towards better social impact? We believe that this is possible. It depends on the agency of various social actors. It will require a decisive developmental state. It will require a cohesive society. It will require a common vision and a state that is able to make adaptations and choices when situations change. What would be the major areas of strategic consideration in this regard without elaborating? Higher rates of growth and restructuring of the economy. And I would agree with Blade, the concept restructuring has in fact been, misappropriated to mean merely black economic empowerment. What our country needs is a structure of the economy that has got a thriving SMME sector, which, if you were to compare ourselves with Latin America, 70% of new jobs are created in that sector. In South Africa, it's only about 50%. It's restructuring of the economy that also ensures more investments go into the productive sector. And you would be able to kill many birds with one stone. As the Harvard Group, so-called, has said, for instance, if you were to invest in tradables, manufacturing, you will export more and therefore be able to deal with the challenge of the current account deficit. But many of those sectors absorb low-skilled and unskilled labor. You are able to kill many birds with one stone. And one needs to make the point, which one made last year, and the point that Blade was making. We believe BMF needs to look at this question. Yes, there has to be shareholding in the context of BEE. Yes, there have to be cash cows and so on. But the focus should be on manufacturing. We should be building a black manufacturing class. The opportunities are many, and I think almost limitless. If you interacted with the DPE, Department of Public Enterprises, with these major infrastructure projects, Transnet is going to need nuts and bolts and wheels and everything. The nuclear energy industry will need all kinds of components. So does electricity, the build program going into trillions of rands into the 2020s. I understand with some of the, is it nuts or bolts or whatever other instruments, we import them from Germany and adapt them in South Africa to our specifications. Why are we not having more black people manufacturing these things with guaranteed markets in terms of this infrastructure program that we have? So restructuring of the economy speaks to that question. Fight against poverty proceeding from the premise that social grants might be critical, but employment and self-employment are the most sustainable ways of dealing with poverty. Building social cohesion by ensuring that the state improves its legitimacy, you deal with corruption and so on. Pursuing international cooperation, proceeding here from the perspective that South Africa has committed its resources, including its young men and women, some of whom have died, in trying to stabilize and achieve peace on the continent. But once that has happened, how adept is our business community in taking advantage of that? And lastly, to build a developmental state. And I should conclude by saying that this 15-year review, it's got data, there's got facts, there's got figures, and in the interaction with peers, there's consensus that those things are accurate. We might differ with regard to analysis. We want to urge you to participate in discourse on these matters. We want BMF to do a review 15 years hence, or rather 15 years since '94. What has changed with regard to the professional community? And what are we doing to ensure that 15 years from now, it will be another country? Thanks.
I'd like to reassure Mr. Netshitenze that given a choice, almost everyone in this building would love the opportunity to listen, not to hurry you. Fortunately, we still have quite a few items for the day. But yeah, very fascinating detail. I'm sure most of us would love to go through the reports in more detail and have even more opportunities to interface with the compilers and authors of that content. By the way, Dr. Nzimande hasn't left. He wanted to sit in a position where he could see the screen and take some notes. I do hope, though, that we'll still have the opportunity to do our whole panel discussion. But we are really behind time. And hopefully during the break, I'll get some directives from the leadership of the BMF on how they hope to progress from now onwards. On a lighter note, one thing in common that Mr. Netshitenze and Dr. Nzimande have, I observed, is the shoe. Trust me. Similar style, unlike my BE shoes. So that should tell you that both comrades are talking from a position of common feeling for their constituencies. And it's not a dictator, trust me. All of us do need some direction every now and then. I was trying to think about how I would introduce Theo Botha. Surname like Botha with activism. You know, when you talk activism, names like Mani, Molefe, Brian, Balula, well, maybe not of late. But if I gave you Julius and Botha, maybe we're getting somewhere. Sormalima, so to speak. But I've accepted defeat. You'll just be Theo Botha. And let's welcome on the stage, ladies and gentlemen, talking activism to advance transformation, Mr. Theo Botha.
Respected delegates from the various components of the Black Management Forum, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. John F. Kennedy said this to the American people: "My fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." Trevor Manuel, in his address at the Steve Biko Memorial Lecture, said, "We need elitists that plow back, not elitists that plunder. We need a business community that balances their freedom to make profits with an understanding of the distorted history of accumulation in our country. We need a private sector that is prepared to be a partner in development. Yes, looking for opportunities to make money, but recognizing the bigger picture. That a stable society is better for growth than a society racked by social strife." So in other words, South Africans from all walks of life should be asking themselves what they can do for their country, and not what the country can do for them. As I stand here before you, I've been called a conduit of trouble, wannabe shareholder activist, idiot. Botha's questions make us look silly. His approach is emotionless and mechanical. I'm wondering what difference they make. I don't know if my questions at AGMs make a difference to our society. My intentions are clear. By asking questions, I'm hoping that society can debate these issues. Only by debating certain issues are we able to arrive at solutions in an orderly manner. You see, certain CEOs and chairmen are not used to debating issues. Or should I say, they're not used to answering questions. Or should I say, maybe they are not used to answering questions in an open, honest, and direct manner. Or should I say, maybe they are not used to answering questions in an open, honest, and direct manner in front of the press. The topic of today is shareholder activism in advancing transformation. Let us define shareholder activism. An activist shareholder is one who uses an equity stake in a corporation to redefine and redirect the management of the corporation. Or an activist shareholder uses an equity stake in a corporation to put public pressure on management. If you think about it, we are all activists in one form or another. Prior to 1994, there were a lot of role players, union leaders, political leaders, 1976 school children, Women's Federation, and many more, all activists. What do these people have in common, apart from being activists? To name but a few: John Dube, Isaac Tabata, Fish Kitsing, Christmas Tinter. All these people raised their hands and said, what can we do for our people? They gave unselfishly of themselves, probably to the detriment of their families and friends. Transformation is the process of altering the way in which an organization does business. So, in other words, we welcome transformation if it encompasses triple bottom line in terms of good governance, where companies cannot and shouldn't produce profits at the expense of society and the environment. The Minister of Finance said that shouldn't produce profits at the expense of, I'm repeating myself. The Minister of Finance stated that the private sector needs to balance their profits with society. So what the Minister of Finance is saying is, let's practice good governance. Transformation can be used to instill good governance. It can be used to advance broad-based black economic empowerment, or just treating your workers fairly or respectfully. So I would like to replace the words activism in my topic with good governance. Therefore, my topic is actually about good governance in advancing transformation. So why am I substituting the words shareholder activism with good governance? Because when I attend AGMs, the most important issue to me is, does the company practice good governance? Therefore, this is common ground between management and myself, because management realizes that, or should I say, some of them realize that good governance can lead to a better perception of the company in the marketplace. It can also lead to a better share price. But if they don't practice good governance, or they say they adhere to King 2, when in fact they don't, then surely they are not practicing what they preach. In a way, I see myself as a server, setting a table for stakeholders to partake in a debate. So therefore, I attend AGMs, I ask questions. These questions are documented in the press. The respective shareholders will then debate issues further, and therefore good governance is reaching common ground between shareholders. Is this debate the four main principles of good governance has to be adhered to? And that is fairness, accountability, responsibility, and transparency. For example, I attended the Remgro General Meeting last week and asked why they have not disclosed this transaction as a related party transaction. Because in terms of Section 10 of the JSE Rules and Regulations, it's clear that this transaction should be disclosed as a related party. Mr. Rupert stated that he felt that it was a related party, but in terms of the law, it wasn't. So if you go out those doors there and you go to the Financial Mail kiosk, I would like you to read that article, because I think it's important that everybody partakes in this debate of what is a related party and what is not a related party. I'd like to discuss the following companies: Woolworths, Pick n Pay, JD Group, Alltech. But before I discuss it, I'd like to quote Duma, who was supposed to be our session moderator. He says, "We have experienced thousands of BEE deals over the past year, but black people still own only about 1% of the JSE. I doubt if people engage in empowerment process in good faith." I'd like to repeat that. I doubt if people engage in the empowerment process in good faith. I think you either want to do it or you don't want to do it. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, why do so many companies embrace BEE and others simply do nothing? And yet you would think that after the 1994 elections, the companies would put empowerment structures in place. Woolworths implemented a BEE employee share ownership scheme in 2007 and stated that, unfortunately, employee turnover amongst the retail sector as a whole, and particularly amongst employees benefiting from BEE employee share ownership scheme, had adversely affected the Woolworths ownership status. I agree, this is an industry problem. Pick n Pay are losing their workforce at the rate of 5,000 workers per year, 40% on the previous year. However, the question we have to ask ourselves is, why are these BEE employee share ownership schemes failing? After all, they are set up to retain staff by offering incentives to stay on. And if this scheme doesn't work and Woolworths doesn't have BEE or BEE equity partners in place, where to from here? Pick n Pay has the identical problem to Woolworths. As I stated earlier, 5,000 staff are leaving the company per year. Options are granted to the staff after 5 years. So in other words, 25,000 staff would have left after 5 years. Pick n Pay doesn't have BEE or broad-based black economic empowerment partners in place. Pick n Pay doesn't have a single black executive director on its board. Pick n Pay's holding company board doesn't comply to King 2. The chairman of the company had this to say: Pick n Pay Holdings does not have a fully functional board right now. My response to this is simple. If you don't adhere to good governance, then just say so. King 2 is self-explanatory in a sense that all we have to do, if you don't adhere, you just acknowledge the fact that we cannot adhere to that and the reasons as to why you don't adhere. The difference between Woolworths and Pick n Pay is that Pick n Pay has a controlling shareholder, being the Ackerman family. So therefore, in theory, you would think that Pick n Pay would be able to embrace broad-based black economic empowerment equity partner easier than Woolworths, because the main shareholders are the directors and chairmen of the respective company. Shoprite also doesn't have a broad-based black economic empowerment partner. So the question is, why don't our biggest food retailers have BEE or broad-based black economic empowerment equity partners? At the Black Management Forum breakfast, I stated that I think that companies should embrace broad-based black economic empowerment as an equity partner on the basis that it would give the company a competitive advantage over other listed companies. Why is this? Because broad-based black economic empowerment is good governance. Why is it good governance? Because King 2 states that companies should not produce profits at the expense of society and the environment, and that this is called triple bottom line. Therefore, social responsibility is good business. So if Pick n Pay embraced broad-based black economic empowerment as an equity partner before Shoprite, this would give them a competitive advantage. Shoprite and Woolworths would be at a disadvantage in the retail sector. Alltech. I asked the chairman of Altec how Altec, being a 5 billion market cap company, managed to win government business with BEE transactions that I calculated to be worth just 32 million. The chairperson, Mr. Davis, said that the issue of empowerment was top of mind at all board meetings and in between meetings. The PIC owns 10% of this company. JD Group relies on black spending power. It is your low to medium LSM that shop there, and yet we've had 14 years of independence. And Mr. Sussman, the chairman of the group, is still trying to cobble together a BEE deal. PIC is the biggest investor. So what are these 5 companies, being Woolworths, JD Group, Pick n Pay, Shoprite, and Altec, have in common? The PIC is either the biggest or the second biggest shareholder in these companies. So in other words, maybe the PIC should champion broad-based black economic empowerment. They can exert influence in a diplomatic way. The PIC is the biggest investor on the JSE. As the biggest investor, they must champion good corporate governance. They've released their good governance principles, and I haven't heard anybody say that these principles are unreasonable. Yet, when you ask directors why aren't they adhering to these principles, they say we have many shareholders. And I say, how many shareholders or fund managers have publicized their policies? None, except the PIC. The bottom line is, good governance pays. And therefore the PIC needs to allocate resources to ensure compliance to its principles in companies that it has invested in. The PIC also places funds with certain fund managers to invest in the market. These fund managers should ensure that the funds invested are invested only in companies which are adhering to the PIC principles. If not, the PIC should withdraw the funds from the respective fund managers. Standard Bank, Liberty, Stanlib, my pet topic. Last year, Liberty Life shareholders approved the buyback of Stanlib shares from Quantum Leap, the empowerment partner, 51% controlled by Safika, of which Mr. Makazuma is a director. Liberty Life Standard Bank released a circular to shareholders explaining the rationale of the buyback of Stanlib shares from the empowerment partner, Quantum Leap. But they never disclosed the annual financial statements of Stanlib. So in a way, you want to buy a business, you go out, speak to somebody who says, oh, the business is worth 4 billion. I think the next question you would ask is, well, let's justify that 4 billion. Can I see your annual financial statements? Well, in this case, Liberty Life Management and Standard Bank Management refused to issue the Stanlib financial statements to the minority shareholders. So I question, how can any shareholder actually vote at that general meeting without actually understanding what they were buying? Were the Standard Bank and Liberty Management being fair? Were they being responsible? But last but not least, are they being transparent? Second issue is, Quantum Leap was one of the first broad-based black economic empowerment vehicles put together, with 49% held by so-called communities. This in itself was good. When the transaction was put together by Standard Bank and Liberty Management, the shareholders were informed as to the benefits and rationale of the transaction, and I quote, both Standard Bank and Liberty are actively involved in the process of transformation in South Africa. Stanlib recognizes that it is a national and business imperative to introduce an empowerment partnership that will support South African socio-economic objectives. Great. So after 3.5 years, Stanlib empowerment partner Quantum Leap sells its shares back to Liberty at enormous profit. Quantum Leap benefited to the tune of plus minus 600 million net profit. I've got no problem with Quantum Leap making super profits, because if Liberty Group wants to pay so much for the buyback of Stanlib shares, then that is their problem. So what problem have I got? The issue I have is that Stanlib, as we speak, doesn't have an empowerment partner. So what happens to the benefits and rationale of the transaction that Standard Bank and Liberty Group management so proudly told its shareholders. Short-lived, the transaction lasted 40 months. Surely Stanley must find another empowerment partner. Or are we going to accept the argument, once empowered, always empowered? I'm against once empowered, always empowered, because we will not achieve anything based on a short-term scenario. It is an easy cop-out for business to say that we have fulfilled our requirements. Mr. Manuel highlighted the principle of once empowered, always empowered as an obvious target for reappraisal. Let me quote Mr. Marie, the CEO of Standard Bank, in regards to the Chinese bank transaction, where certain empowerment partners sold out a portion of their stake. Surprisingly, Marie said Standard Bank won't top up its black ownership. We believe in the once empowered, always empowered principles. But this will be a good test case. In a worst case scenario, we'll lose some charter points. Well, Mr. Marie, how many charter points have you lost with Stanley? As they have no empowerment partner as we speak, and as the PIC has funds invested with Stanley, which I'm sure they have, and they don't believe in the policy of once empowered, always empowered, then they must withdraw their funds with immediate effect. What has happened in the past has happened. But what we must understand is that BEE is a thing of the past, but broad-based black economic empowerment is the future. We need to do empowerment transactions for previously disadvantaged communities. And these projects are of a long-term nature. Annuity-based income should be our priority. To sum up, first observation, if I may quote Dr. Blades and Nzimande, it's not an accident that BEE has been narrow and benefiting only a small elite. Implementing broad-based black economic empowerment will give the companies that implement it a competitive advantage over companies with BEE. Responsibility is good business. I strongly believe that it's possible to structure empowerment transactions for the disadvantaged communities where they obtain an equity stake in an organization, not to make a quick capital gain, but derive annuity-based income over a long period, and then to use that annuity-based income to uplift their respective communities. Second observation, PIC must champion good governance. They must ensure that companies adhere to corporate governance principles. Those companies that don't adhere need to explain why they don't adhere. They must ensure that they place money with fund managers and that these fund managers are BEE compliant. Third observation, once empowered, always empowered, is a short-term scenario. In and out, building wealth takes decades. So at the end of the day, I have a dream that good governance and the principles of good governance will help to transform our country, if used correctly by all concerned stakeholders. If you go back to the original topic, shareholder activism and advancing transformation, I stand in front of you as a mere servant, setting the table or the forum. I see my role as merely asking questions at AGMs and hoping that the press will document those questions so that the directors, the shareholders, the unions, the employees, the regulators, in fact all stakeholders that are involved with the company concerned can debate the subject. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Black Management Forum for allowing me to address you. Thank you.
Now you understand why this Botha is an activist. We unfortunately have run out of time, so we will not have a Q&A session. And I know you have a lot of questions for them, but we need to move on. What I'm going to do, though, is to ask each one of them to give us just a 30-second, be it a conclusion or observation, on one point that you're sitting down and you're thinking, I should have said that, or actually, I shouldn't have said that. So, just half an hour of punchy points. Sorry, it's 30 seconds. 30 seconds. And we'll go according to the sequence. So, starting with Mr. Ndlovu, if you want to just, from where you're sitting maybe, just 1, 2 punchy points, 30 seconds in conclusion before we close. Let's see if it works. Yeah.
Yeah, no, ladies and gentlemen, I wouldn't like to spoil in any way whatsoever the good presentations and inputs that have been given. It's a pity we can't engage. For me, really, the issue is an issue of leadership. All the issues raised here revolve and turn on leadership. and the BMF is a leadership organization. The answers therefore largely lie in our hands to bring about the change and desired outcomes that we want to see. So I think we're equal to the task and to the challenge. Wish you well. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Ndlovu. Dr. Nzimande?
He's trying to say I mustn't respond to him. I will respond briefly. Let's Joel speak. We call it that in the ANC. Because parting with Vodacom by Telkom is a big problem. It still amounts to the same thing. And the weaknesses that led to that were as a result of the privatization of Telkom. But I won't debate. We still have the whole weekend to debate about that. And also just to say, very quickly, fiscal discipline is necessary. The SACP is not saying that we don't need fiscal discipline, but it must be applied consistently. You can't say you have fiscal discipline and then you have the Gau train, the train for the rich boys and girls, Kucha, arms procurement, pebble bed modular reactor, big, massive, wasteful projects in essence. And to end, maybe by saying, extending once more the invitation that we would like to engage with the BMF leadership on our own perspectives and also hear the perspectives of the BMF outside of a conference in a much more detailed manner. But it's been an honor to be here today.
Thank you, Dr. Nzimande. Mr. President?
Perhaps I should reiterate what I said last year. And this is to make the point that advancement of any society should rest on two things. And all those issues pertain to what one calls human civilization. In the first instance, do you have humane social and political relations? And to what extent are we as society building those humane political and social relations? Democracy, social inclusion, and so on. Second element is the development of productive forces, development of your technology to make life easier for human beings as you advance. That development will require that you have infrastructure, manufacturing capacity, industries that absorb labor, but also utilization of cutting-edge technology. This might require, in some instances, that you have the kinds of big projects that Blade was referring to. I've always wondered in the context of Blade's aversion to big projects, that if we did not have the Ben-Schoeman Highway before 1994, wouldn't Blade have argued just widen the old Johannesburg Road?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm sure most of us feel like we're missing out on what's going to happen this weekend. And lastly, Mr. Botha, your closing remarks.
I just want to say, I wish I was a politician, because I could say a lot. But I actually have got nothing to say. Thank you so much.
Mr. Manyi?
Mine is just to thank the panelists. I really think we had a wonderful morning interesting insights. It's a pity that time is the enemy, but I just want to say to congratulate that if the Central Committee can be members of the BMF, we'll see what we can do with the 15 seats.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've been an amazing audience. We're going to take a break. Please make sure that you're back here by 30:30. There's a great panel coming up. I want to recognize in advance the previous president of the BMF, Mr. Megisvia, who's part of the next panel. So do not miss out. Have a wonderful conference and well done to yourselves. You've been amazing.
You won't be time by 20 minutes.